I'm going to be straight with you. What happened in Berea yesterday was not supposed to go like this. Not on day one. Not this cleanly, not this loudly, and definitely not in a way that left people standing on the sideline exchanging glances like they just witnessed something they hadn't fully prepared themselves to see. May 19th, 2026. First day of Cleveland Browns OTAs under Todd Monken. And by the time the session ended, the entire quarterback conversation in Northeast Ohio had shifted in a direction that a lot of people in this league are not ready to publicly acknowledge yet. Let me give you the honest context first, because it matters for understanding why yesterday hit the way it did. Coming into these OTAs, the media narrative had been settled for weeks. Deshaun Watson was the guy. Watson had the experience. Watson had the pedigree. Watson had reportedly built genuine chemistry with Monken during the voluntary minicamp sessions in late April, and the sources leaking out of the building were pointing in one direction. The three-time Pro Bowler, the quarterback with a $230 million guaranteed contract still sitting on this organization's salary cap, the guy who hasn't played a complete, meaningful season since his time in Houston, he was supposedly leading this race. The establishment had already written the story. Watson was the safe choice, the veteran presence, the guy a new offensive coordinator could trust to manage a complex system while the young kid behind him learned the game at the professional level the way young quarterbacks are supposed to learn it, slowly, from the sideline, behind someone else. Nobody delivered that script to Shedeur Sanders. And yesterday, on the opening day of organized team activities, the second-year quarterback out of Colorado walked onto that practice field and made the entire pre-written narrative look like something that belonged in a recycling bin. Here's what actually happened, and I want to walk through this carefully because the details are what make this significant. In 13 snaps during team drills, a combination of 7-on-7 periods and 11-on-11 work, Sanders completed passes at a rate that reporters and scouts present on the sideline described as well above 90%. Let me put that number in perspective for a moment, because I think it gets cited and then moves past too quickly. 90% completion on the first day of OTAs, not a preseason game, not a controlled throwing session, not individual routes against air. 11-on-11 team drills with a defense that is actively trying to take things away, disguise coverages, and create confusion for the offense. 90% completion in that environment on day one of a brand new system under a head coach he's known for a matter of weeks is not a routine number. It is not a number that coaches file away and forget. It is a number that creates conversations in staff meetings that nobody outside the building is invited to. Watson took his snaps. He showed the arm talent that made him a first overall pick years ago. He moved the ball. But the energy on that sideline when the session finished, the conversations happening between coaches, the reactions from players, the quiet intensity from the scouts who were present, none of that energy was gravitating toward the veteran. It was circling around the kid from Colorado who was supposed to be learning his place in the pecking order. Now I want to describe the throw that stopped everything, because this is the moment that crystallized what kind of day this actually was. It came during a 7-on-7 period. The defense had done a solid job simulating pressure through the drill structure, and Sanders felt it. His internal clock registered the threat, and his feet responded before his conscious mind could have processed the instruction. He stepped up through the pocket instinctively, the way players who genuinely understand pocket geometry move, not scrambling, not panicking, just relocating with purpose while keeping his eyes fixed downfield. And then came the moment. His weight shifted back, his back foot dug into the turf. His upper body angled away from the line of scrimmage at a degree that would have given most quarterbacks in this league all the justification they needed to throw the ball out of bounds, protect themselves, live to throw another day. Sanders held it. He held the ball for just a fraction of a second longer than seemed physically reasonable given the angle his body was at. His eyes never left the route developing downfield. And then, with a snap of his wrist that transmitted force through the ball with almost mechanical precision, he threw a dart to Concepcion that split the coverage, arrived on time, and landed in stride. I've watched enough football to know what makes a throw technically difficult. It's not always about the distance or the velocity. Sometimes it's about the body position the quarterback has to operate from, the angle of release, the degree of trust required in your own arm to commit to a window that's already closing. That throw demanded all of those things simultaneously, and Sanders executed it with the kind of composure that you cannot manufacture through film study alone. That composure either lives in a player or it doesn't. Yesterday, it was visible for everyone present to see. One scout on the sideline, according to accounts that came out after the session, turned to a colleague when that ball landed in Concepcion's hands. He didn't say anything. He just nodded slowly. I keep thinking about that detail, because sometimes the most revealing reactions are the ones that don't require words. A scout who has evaluated hundreds of quarterbacks at every level of this game, who has been trained to be analytical and measured in his assessments, who has no emotional stake in what happens to the Cleveland Browns, just nodded. That nod carried a lot of information. But the day wasn't built on one throw, and I think it's important to convey that, because one spectacular play can be explained away. Patterns are harder to dismiss. Later in the same session, during 11-on-11 team drills, Sanders lined up under center with the first team offense. The play design called for a quick slant developing on the right side of the field. Clean concept, straightforward execution, the kind of play that should be a relatively simple read in a new offensive system. Except the defense had it completely diagnosed. The linebacker dropped directly into the throwing lane the moment the ball was snapped. The cornerback was pressing the route, eliminating the cushion that the design had assumed. For a brief moment, the play was dead. Any quarterback making the reasonable football decision kills it immediately, checks down, takes the safe completion, and moves to the next snap. Sanders didn't make the reasonable football decision. What he did instead was something that requires not just arm talent, but a specific kind of mental processing speed that separates quarterbacks who manage games from quarterbacks who control them. In less than a full second, he reset his feet. He used a deliberate hitch in his delivery to hold the linebacker in his current position for just long enough. And then he shifted his vision to the back of the end zone, where a receiver had drifted out of his assigned route and found a narrow corridor between the safety rotating over and the boundary. The window was real, but it was tight, and it was closing at the speed that windows in the NFL always close. Sanders threw it anyway. He drove the ball on a flat, tight trajectory across the middle of the field, through a gap that I think the majority of starting quarterbacks in this league would have looked at and decided wasn't worth the risk. The receiver caught it cleanly. Touchdown. And the offensive unit on the sideline reacted the way players react when they've just seen something that confirms what they've been privately hoping is true about the guy they're being asked to block for and run routes for. That kind of reaction, that spontaneous, uncoordinated eruption from teammates, is one of the most authentic things you can observe about how a quarterback is being received in his own locker room. Even some of the defensive players reacted, which, if you've spent any time around football, you know is the hardest reaction to earn. Defenders do not celebrate the guy who just beat them. They shake their heads slightly. They look at the ground. They exchange a glance with a teammate that communicates something like, "Okay, that was real." That was what I saw on that sideline. Now let me talk about what this actually means within the larger competitive context, because I don't want to overreact to a single OTA session, and I don't think anyone should. OTAs are non-contact. Defenses can't hit quarterbacks. The game pressure is artificial. Great days in May don't guarantee anything in September. I understand all of that. But here's what I also understand. The purpose of OTAs isn't just physical development. It's about establishing rhythm, communication, and trust within a new offensive system. It's about a coaching staff gathering information they'll use to make decisions that carry real consequences. And the information that Todd Monken and his staff collected on day one of these OTAs is not information that supports the pre-existing narrative about this quarterback competition. Monken runs a system that demands precise processing from whoever is operating it. He built one of the most sophisticated offenses in football in Baltimore, and the intellectual requirements of executing it correctly at the NFL level are significant. The question surrounding Sanders entering these OTAs wasn't about whether his arm was good enough. Anyone who watched him at Colorado knew the arm was good enough. The question was whether a second-year player, still relatively early in his professional development, could absorb and operate a genuinely complex offensive structure with the precision and speed that Monken's system requires? Yesterday was an early but meaningful answer to that question. A 90+% completion rate in team drills doesn't happen because a quarterback is guessing. It doesn't happen because the defense wasn't trying. It happens because the quarterback is processing information quickly enough to consistently identify where the ball needs to go before the window closes. That processing speed, that ability to translate what the defense is showing into a correct decision faster than the defense can execute its own design, is the foundational skill that separates serviceable NFL quarterbacks from ones who make teams genuinely dangerous. Yesterday, Sanders demonstrated that processing speed in a new system on the first day of formal installation in front of a coaching staff that is actively evaluating him. Watson brings something different, and it deserves honest acknowledgement. He brings experience navigating difficult in-game moments, real game speed, the kind of situational awareness that only accumulates through years of starting in this league. Those things have value. But football is fundamentally about what you can do right now on this day, in this system, against these defenders. And right now, on this day, in this system, the younger quarterback was the more compelling presence on that field. What follows over the coming weeks is important. OTAs run in 3-day blocks across several weeks before mandatory minicamp arrives on June 9th through the 11th. Every session between now and the start of training camp in late July represents another data point for a coaching staff that is making one of the most consequential roster decisions this franchise has faced in years. A completion rate above 90% on day one cannot be dismissed. The touchdown throws cannot be unseen. The backward-leaning rope to Concepcion and the crossbody bullet into the end zone are now part of the evaluation record regardless of what anyone inside that building was hoping to see when the day started. There's a larger story underneath the day-to-day competition results, and I want to make sure it doesn't get lost. Shedeur Sanders falling to the 5th round of the 2025 draft was one of the most discussed, dissected, and debated events of that entire offseason cycle. The reasons offered at the time ranged from legitimate football concerns to things that had nothing to do with football at all. A year later, inside a system designed by a head coach with genuine offensive credibility, operating with first-team receivers who were selected specifically to complement his skill set, Sanders is delivering the kind of performances that make the original evaluation look, at minimum, like a significant miscalculation by the franchises that passed on him. He's not playing with a chip on his shoulder in the way that phrase usually gets deployed, as shorthand for visible anger or public bitterness. He's playing with something quieter and more sustainable than that. He bought a house in Cleveland. He stayed in the building all winter. He showed up first in voluntary minicamp. He walked onto the OTA field on day one and completed over 90% of his throws in a brand new system against professional defenders who were actively trying to stop him. That's not emotion-driving performance. That's preparation meeting opportunity in the most direct and undeniable way. The quarterback competition in Cleveland is real. Anyone who tells you it's already over in either direction, for Watson or for Sanders, is working from a conclusion they decided on before watching the film. What I can tell you is that the conclusion that existed in most people's heads before yesterday morning is no longer the only reasonable conclusion available. Something shifted in Berea on May 19th, 2026. The evidence is sitting in the coaching staff's evaluation files right now, and it points somewhere specific. The weeks ahead will tell us whether yesterday was the beginning of something or simply a very good day. But my honest read, having watched what happened and thought carefully about what it means, is that the people who dismissed Shedeur Sanders a year ago are going to spend a significant portion of this summer being reminded of that decision.